Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to U.S. Higher Education. My name is Darla Deardorff, Executive Director of the Association of International Education Administrators, and I am joined today by colleagues from the State Department and from several universities in the United States. You'll be hearing today from our speakers, and I'll introduce them a bit more later, but Wing Kai To from Bridgewater State University, Tania Navis Hope from Howard University, Jule Nguyen from Tennessee State University, and David Fleshler from Case Western Reserve. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to Rebecca Johnson, Program Officer with the U.S. Department of State. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Darla. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you might be joining us in the world. Welcome. We are very happy to have you. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Introducing the U.S. Higher Education System. As we begin this webinar, I wanted to just take a few minutes to say welcome and provide a small piece of context on this event before I turn it over to our wonderful expert speakers. As Darla noted, my name is Rebecca Johnson, and I work with the State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, or ACA, as we call it. As you can see on the slide here, ECA is the part of the State Department that works to increase mutual understanding between people of the United States and the people of other countries through educational and cultural exchanges. We send US students, teachers, professionals, artists, and all types of people you can imagine overseas to work, conduct research, and build relationships with their peers. And those same groups of people we bring from foreign countries to the United States for similar activities. Many of these programs work specifically to support connections between US and foreign academics and higher education institutions, including one program, the Increase and Diversify Education Abroad for US Students, or IDEAS program, as we call it, another government acronym for you, which is hosting this training and initiative today. International higher education partnerships are an important tool for promoting international collaboration on key global issues around foreign policy priorities and global issues that, quite frankly, cannot be solved by one country, but that we need to work on together. ECA is committed to fostering academic partnerships between US and foreign higher education institutions, including the development of research together, dual or joint degree programs, and the two-way exchanges of students, faculty, and researchers in all fields possible. As part of ECA's efforts to promote higher education partnerships, we have worked with our State Department colleagues in East Asia and the Pacific to launch the U.S. ASEAN University Connections Initiative, which, if we go to the next slide, you will see a short piece of information on. This is a White House initiative announced during the May 2022 U.S. ASEAN Special Summit that is bringing together leaders from diverse colleges and universities in the United States and ASEAN for trainings and networking to foster sustainable international academic partnerships. For those of you who are fellows in this special initiative, congratulations and welcome. For those of you who are not fellows, worry not, we are happy to have you as well. We are thrilled to have you here. This webinar is the first training launching this U.S. ASEAN University Connections Initiative, and we want to start with a foundational topic, an overview of the U.S. higher education system in all of its complexity and glory. This information is not specific to ASEAN, though, so we have opened up this event to higher education representatives around the globe who are interested in building partnerships with U.S. institutions with the goal of expanding the impact of this exciting new initiative. Welcome, all of you, wherever you may be joining from, and thank you for your interest in building meaningful, sustainable partnerships with U.S. colleges and universities. The U.S. Department of State is thrilled to be partnering with you on this and hope that we can work together to build mutually beneficial exchanges. I hope this training and other public ones that we'll be offering through the U.S. ASEAN University Connections Initiative will prove useful for you and your institutions. I will stop there. I will turn it over to our real experts who are with us today, but I hope that brief overview maybe provides some helpful context for why we are here today, why the State Department is supporting this event, and why we want you all to build meaningful connections with your US counterparts. Thank you for your time. I want to also say thank you to our wonderful speakers to AIEA for organizing this presentation into our Ideas Program team at World Learning. Thank you all, and back to you, Darla.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for providing that context. And let me also add my welcome again to all of you, and especially to our fellows. We're really looking forward to being with you during this time today in the webinar. So the learning outcomes of this webinar today, as you see on the screen, are about helping that you will gain a deeper understanding of the internationalization of higher education in the US, to gain a deeper understanding, particularly of the landscape of US higher education, and to gain a deeper understanding of some different institutional types in the United States. So that's what we hope you'll walk away with. And ultimately, as you leave the webinar today, understand the rich diversity within higher education institutions in the United States, as you seek to build partnerships and relationships with those institutions. So before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge on the next slide that the AIEA Secretariat is located on the ancestral lands of the Shakori, Occaneechi, and Catawba peoples, which would be in the state of North Carolina in the United States. AIEA honors with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit. And in addition, we want to acknowledge the overlapping histories of this land, including past violence and ongoing harm produced by the legacy of racialized slavery and oppression. And within the US context, I want to just add that land acknowledgements are becoming increasingly important, and you'll see a bit more about land acknowledgements on the right-hand side of the slide. So now it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce you to AIEA's president, Dr. Jule Nguyen, who is Executive Director for International Programs, the Senior International Officer, the Chief Diversity Officer, and an Assistant Professor at Tennessee State University. Dr. Nguyen could not join us in person, but she has recorded a message for all of us. And so at this point, we look forward to hearing Dr. Nguyen's words.
Greetings. I am Jule Nguyen, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Association of International Education Administrators for the year 2022-2023. We are truly excited to participate in the inaugural US ASEAN University Connections Initiative, a program with the US State Department and World Learning. As the only association dedicated exclusively to senior leaders in the field of international education, we bring together international education leaders into dialogue with each other, our counterparts around the world, organizations that promote international education, and organizations concerned with the shaping and management of international higher education. This initiative is a perfect example of providing our members an opportunity to foster sustainable international academic partnerships between the United States and ASEAN institutions, as you will hear in detail throughout this meeting. I look forward to hearing more as the project is launched, and I am willing to assist in any way to making this successful venture wonderful for everyone involved. Together, we are truly stronger. Enjoy the webinar, ladies and gentlemen.
And thanks so much to AIA's president, Dr. Nguyen, for delivering this message. And you've heard a lot about AIEA, and let me just say a few words about this organization for those who may not be familiar with this. AIEA stands for the Association of International Education Administrators, and this year, 2022, we are celebrating 40 years since AIEA was founded back in 1982. And the statement that kind of a way to think about AIEA is that AIEA is equipping leaders to shape the future of higher education in a global context. We have members from all over the world, although the majority of our members do come from within the United States. And we are very excited to be hosting our annual conference in February of 2023 in Washington, D.C., to which all of you are invited to come. And we look forward to particularly welcoming our ASEAN fellows at that conference in February. Now, throughout this webinar and at the conference, you will hear reference made to Senior International Officer. This is a term that AIA utilizes to describe those university leaders who are charged with leading and facilitating comprehensive internationalization efforts. We recognize that these SIOs, Senior International Officers, have many different actual titles within their university or college context. And you see some of those listed here, whether they might be Vice Provost or Executive Director, Vice Rector, International Liaison Officer, and so on. There are many different titles of these leaders, but all of them are indeed leading internationalization efforts at their institutions. And if you'd like to see more information about an SIO profile, you can find that on the AIA website. This is an SIO profile survey that AIA does every 3 years with its members. And so you can learn more about SIOs from the website and the executive summary found there. So a little bit more about the SIO. We recognize that these university higher education leaders have multiple areas of responsibility. So while some of it may involve education abroad, it could also involve international student recruitment. It could involve working with faculty on the curriculum. Particularly, and I think what is of interest to those gathered here today is that often SIOs have responsibility for international institutional linkages, and they are the ones who are ultimately establishing and developing these partnerships. It's also about research and language and many other areas of responsibility that SIOs may be tasked with at their institutions. So that just gives you a brief snapshot of SIOs. Now, I did mention the term internationalization, and I'd like to provide you with a definition of this term. This is a definition that is most often used within the field of international higher education. It originated from Jane Knight's work back in 2008, and then it was refined further by colleagues in 2015. But internationalization of higher education is the intentional process of integrating an international, intercultural, or global dimension into the purpose, functions, and delivery of post-secondary education in order to enhance the quality of education and research for all students and staff, and to make a meaningful contribution to society. So that is our working definition of internationalization. And one other definition to share with you comes from our sister association, the American Council on Education, which defines comprehensive internationalization as a strategic and integrated approach to internationalization in which institutions articulate internationalization as an institutional goal, if not a priority, and develop an internationalization plan driven by sound analysis and seek to bring together the usually disparate and often marginalized aspects of internationalization. So you can see from these definitions that internationalization and conference internationalization is much more than study abroad or moving students back and forth around the world, but that it's really it's an integrated dimension into all of the work of the institution. And you'll hear more about that from our speakers today. One last piece I wanted to share with you before I turn it over to our speakers today is just to note that AIEA has developed standards of professional practice for international education leaders. These are 22 standards that can be found under 4 different categories. You see those 4 categories on the slide here that involve internationalization expertise that we just talked about, the leadership and management aspects, advocacy, and personal effectiveness, which also includes, for example, skills like intercultural skills. So if you'd like to learn more about those 22 standards, you'll find them on the AIA website at aiaworld.org. So I wanted to list that as a resource. So now that brings us to the topic of today's webinar. And we start with Wing Kai To, who is the SIO, now you know, the Senior International Officer at Bridgewater State University, who's going to share with us a bit more of an introduction to the U.S. higher education landscape. Over to you, Wing Kai To.
Thank you very much, Darla, and thank you, the State Department, ECA, AIEA, and also World Learning for bringing all of us together tonight in the US and perhaps morning in ASEAN countries to talk about our US higher education landscape. So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to give a very brief overview of US higher education, and two of my other SIO colleagues will give more specific examples about public and private universities and also other minority serving institutions. So as you just heard from the webinar, the State Department has mentioned the goal of this program, and as AIEA also talked about the role of senior international officers and how we promote international programs and exchanges. So I'd like to use this slide to explain that there are multiple ways of defining what we do, but this is an overview of some of the specific initiatives and programs with ASEAN countries in particular. So State Department regularly offers different types of international exchange programs, and this ASEAN initiative for university connections is one of these programs. And of course, we have many higher education institutions represented in this webinar, and the goal of this program is to develop some international partnerships or university partnerships between the United States and ASEAN countries. If we talk about this in more general terms, we are talking about academic collaborations of all kinds between US high institutions, education institutions, and ASEAN universities. Most university leaders would identify the mission of our universities as providing research, teaching, and service to the community and to the larger higher education landscape. So a lot of collaborations are going to be focusing on research, teaching, and also service to the local communities. But we want to give more specific examples of what we do. And here are some of the examples. And sometimes we would focus on sending our students abroad. Sometimes we would focus on receiving students from ASEAN countries to the United States. So in this way, we have mobility of both sides. Other than international students and study abroad students, sometimes we can also develop certain programs for our local students through virtual exchange or online learning. I think the pandemic has taught us that there are multiple ways of collaborations, including connecting different classes together for virtual exchange. In the past, there have been many students who come to the United States to learn about English language before they get admission to regular universities. So there are multiple long-term or short-term English language programs as well. Finally, the students who are here, sometimes they can participate in internships during their international study, what we call Certified Practical Training, or CPT, or after they graduate, you can stay in the United States between 1 to 3 years for optional practical training to apply what they learned from their classes. Other than these programs, let's look at the classification of institutions of higher education. Most people use the Carnegie classification of institutions, which has been in place since the 1970s. Every few years, we use this to categorize different types of institutions, sometimes based on the program, sometimes based on the size, the mission, and other factors. So there are a number of different institutional types, including doctoral research universities that offer doctorate degrees, master comprehensive universities that offer both bachelor and master degrees, liberal arts colleges, which are private colleges and undergraduate institutions. We also have 2-year community and technical colleges. And last but not least, we have a number of minority serving institutions, including HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, HSIs, Hispanic serving institutions, TCUs, tribal colleges and universities, ANAPISIs, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions. Also, there are other online educational opportunities. And my colleagues will speak more specifically about several types of these institutions in a minute. So when we talk about US institutions, I think we need to think about the diversity of our higher education institutions. According to the latest statistics, there may be over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, in all 50 states and US territories. So of these 4,000 to 5,000 colleges and universities, they range from very large size of 50,000 students or more to 1,000 students or less. So from very large to very small. Most of the universities are what we call secular universities, but there are also a number of universities that are religiously affiliated. In terms of the locations, some universities are located in the city, in the urban areas. Some are in the suburban area outside major city, and while others are in more rural areas. In terms of demographics, some universities serve traditional age students after high schools, usually ranging from age 18 to age 23. And while other universities admit students of all age groups, typically we will welcome students of all ages, but there are different types of institutions that have a larger mix of traditional age and older students. Finally, most universities really apply the idea of equal opportunity, non-discrimination, and diversity in our mission since the civil rights movement. And again, the other SIO colleague will speak more about this. I'll just give you an example. Each of the universities in the United States, especially those public universities, would have a statement that really affirm our values of equal opportunity and non-discrimination. In my university in Massachusetts, we use this language, which states that Bridgewater State University does not unlawfully discriminate in admission or access to, or treatment or employment in its educational programs and activities on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, genetic information, marital or parental status, or veteran status. You will find these statements in other universities as well. I'm sure in your higher education institutions in your country, you also have other values that affirm these kinds of diversity in your student population and in your staff and faculty. So I'll just go over these categories very briefly. First, there are doctorate public universities. These public universities is either a college or university funded primarily by the government, but not totally by the government. For example, some universities would have a combination of just less than half of the funding comes from the government, and then there are other sources of funding as well. But the important fact is that they're funded by the government. The national and doctorate public universities place a stronger emphasis on research, graduate programs. They tend to be larger in size. They also have more support from state funding and their private alumni. These universities are sometimes called the R1 universities, typically draw a larger number of international students with more resources for internationalization. And then you have the master and baccalaureate public universities. And these universities offer a wide range of degree offerings. They tend to attract more students in their own region while serving the needs of many first generation and working class students from diverse backgrounds. Sometimes we call these universities regional universities, but they can also draw students from international background or from all over the world. And the focus on undergraduate teaching and learning in these comprehensive universities sometimes facilitate high impact practices for global engagement as well. They will tend to give individual attention to partnerships, and students can be expected from these some of these universities. And then you have the private universities and liberal arts colleges. And private universities can vary in size, with some very large, with 30,000 or 40,000 students, while the smallest one could be, 100, 200 students. And they range very widely in selectivity and goals, ranging from very prestigious research institutions to very small colleges, and sometimes also to professional or for-profit institutions. And many private institutions support global learning and study abroad in their curriculum so that they can provide more international experiences for their students. And you see that particularly in many private liberal arts colleges that have a larger number of students studying abroad. Liberal arts colleges tend to be smaller in size. They don't offer doctorate programs, but they focus on very broad fields of study in arts, humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. And most of these small private colleges, they value undergraduate teaching and learning, and with a smaller class sizes, so that they can foster student engagement. Then we have the 2 years technical and community and technical colleges. And these colleges offer 2 years associate degrees, and students usually complete a vocational or technical degree for career preparation. And they can either finish their degree to enter a profession, or they will transfer to a 4-year institution upon completion. And most of these community and technical colleges do not have residence halls, and students are just going to the campus, and they also serve their local community. However, it's also important to note that these community and technical colleges sometimes could be very important for international collaborations, especially for students who want to first learn about English language or other programs, and they will go to these community colleges. There are also other mobility-based and virtual opportunities for these community college consortia. So now I've explained the different types of higher education institutions. I would just like to use the final slide to talk about some of the characteristics of US educational system. Most people would attribute the strengths of the US educational systems as the following. As you can see, there's much diversity of our international students, faculty, programs, and opportunities in US colleges and universities. As I mentioned, there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the US. And the diversity is really a strength of the United States. And most of these universities offer very flexible undergraduate liberal arts focus. So students do not have to really focus on a major when they enter the university. They can take time to think about what they can learn about, and then really receive a much broader based education. And with this focus on liberal arts, there's also an emphasis on critical thinking in our educational system, while we also focus on research opportunities for our students with very good research infrastructure in many universities. Because of this, students are able to engage with the faculty members in the teaching and learning. Outside the classrooms, we also like to emphasize that in the United States, there are many universities that have very vibrant campus cultures and student life. So students, when they go to a university, they can join lots of clubs and organizations and participate in many campus activities, and also connect the campus to the local community, and also meet other international students. As we all know, the United States is well known for our higher educational system, so we are really globally recognized in terms of our quality. However, I would like all of us to think about certain features of US educational system that people should be aware of. Perhaps one of the biggest differences between the United States and other higher educational systems is that we are very decentralized educational system. We do not have a centralized governing body in the whole country for a higher educational system. Even though we have a Department of Education, we don't really have a Ministry of Education that really control all the educational system in each of the states. So you might go to each of the states of the United States and we'll find that there are many different systems in terms of higher education. As compared to some developing countries, our tuition and fees tend to be higher, so students would need to prepare for that. If students want to go into very well-renowned universities, it's very competitive to get into those universities. Students should also be prepared for a higher cost of living in the United States, including not just tuition and fees, but also room and board, and also health insurances and other expenses. Having said all of that, we all know that there's not one size fits all. And since there are so many U.S. higher education institutions, partnerships can be productive for all types of institutions based on your institutional need. So you'd rather partner with university or program that really fit the interest of your university and serve your students than just focusing on the ranking or the, the reputation of the university. Most all the universities are very high quality if they are accredited by the government and the regional authorities. So now I turn it back to Darla.
Thank you so much, Nguyen Khai. Really appreciate that wonderful overview of the landscape of U.S. higher education. And Nguyen Khai is one of our leaders in AIEA, and we really appreciate you providing that overview. So Nguyen Khai talked about public and private institutions, and it's important to go a little bit more into detail about those two very broad types of institutions of higher education in the US. And here to do that is David Fleschler, who is also not only the SIO at Case Western Reserve University, but is the immediate past president of AIEA. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce to you David Fleschler. Over to you, David.
Darla, thank you very much. It's nice to be here. And although I can't see what I see are at least 60 participants, it's nice that you're here. And I look forward to at least some of you being here in the United States for this initiative. Before we go to the first slide, let me do a little bit of context setting for all of you about U.S. Higher education. We're a fairly new country, and our education system actually comes from not the United States. It didn't just spring up here. It really comes from higher education in Europe, because that's where most early settlers, obviously there were Native Americans who were here, but the early settlers were from Europe. And in Europe, the earliest universities came out of a religious tradition. So in the 9th century, there was a medical school in Salerno, Italy. In the 11th century, probably many of you know that what's considered the first university was the University of Bologna in Italy. So this goes back essentially 1,000 years. The early curriculum really was very based on canon law and theology. And then the later curriculum became liberal arts. Interestingly, the charters of these early universities were from the heads of state, were from kings, or were from popes. And what they said to the universities, and this is important in how US universities picked them up, these popes or kings or emperors said that universities in Europe were free to govern themselves. They could elect their own heads, their own rectors, but they were also required to finance themselves, meaning that they had to charge fees, which later became tuition. And what Nguyen Khai described as the tuition payments that we have in the United States really comes from that from that background. So then you come to the United States, or at the time it was the colonies of Great Britain, and the earliest universities were private universities, and they were really for very elite, privileged persons, designed to educate ministers, designed to educate religious people. And the curriculum involved theology and philosophy. And our first colleges were colleges that you've probably all heard of. So Harvard is considered the first college in the United States in 1636. And then Princeton, 1701, Columbia, 1754. These were the earliest universities in the United States. Later, in the early 1800s, we started seeing public universities, and that came because of public debate, that we needed to do something more than just religious education. So the University of Michigan in 1817, the University of Virginia in 1819. And so that's where the background of our university system comes from. Katie, if you can switch up now 2 slides to the land-grant universities. Then in the middle of the 1800s, we have something called land-grant universities. This was when the federal government gave land, donated land to the states with a vision of providing liberal and practical education to what they called the industrial class. And this meant virtually anybody. And so the curriculum were the things you see on the screen here: agriculture, military tactics, mechanic arts, and the universities that you can see here as well were the ones that you've also heard of. Cornell, the University of California system started as a land grant. Ohio State started as a land grant institution. All right, if you can go back 1 slide now. So that's the basis for our public and private system. The public system primarily funded through state governments. The private system funded through tuition, donors, and endowment funds. Of course, the public system has some of that as well, but the public system also has public funding, state funding. There's tuition in both public and private, but the cost of tuition in the public schools is quite a bit less than in most private schools. As Wing Kai described, there are still schools that have religious affiliation. Public schools do not have religious affiliation. They must be secular, but private schools can be religious. And then, of course, the size, which also Wing Kai described, typically the public institution is larger, not always, but typically, and then the private institution is smaller. And then, Katie, if you can skip to the final, my final slide. And so just to give you a sense of the growth in higher education, in 1870, there were less than 10,000 BA degrees awarded. By 2009, we probably have updated numbers on this, but there were over 1.6 million BA degrees awarded. So many, many more people in the United States now have a college education than they did when the country was much younger. I won't go into the specifics of the reasons for growth, but the biggest is that higher education was, number one, affordable, and number two, people recognized that they could get good jobs, they could go on to build their lives and careers if they had a higher education. And then I won't go over the types of universities because Wing Kai has already done that. I hope this gives you a little bit of background for the kinds of universities you'll see when you come to the United States. Darla, back to you.
Thank you so much, David, for providing more of that context and background of how these institutions evolved in the United States. And I should also mention, and neglected to do so, that David Fleschler is the conference chair of the 2023 conference. So you will definitely be seeing him at the conference in DC in February. So thank you again so much, David, for providing those insights. And now I am very pleased to introduce to you all Tania Hope, who is the Senior International Officer at Howard University. And Tania is going to go into a bit more detail of what Wing Kai mentioned in the beginning in his presentation about the minority serving institutions. And Tania, look forward to hearing a little more detail about these minority serving institutions. Over to you.
Thank you, Darla. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where it is that you are in the world. Again, my name is Tania Hope. I'm from Howard University here in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about minority serving institutions. I will preface this by saying that minority serving institutions is a term that I am not a fan of. It refers to the multiple ethnicities and cultures that make up the population of this country. But it is a term that I'm trying to move away from, and I may get into that a little bit later, but it is a term that is the official term of the US government, and it's a term that is easily, it's used to easily identify a group of institutions that serve these multiple cultures and ethnicities that make up the United States population. So what is a minority serving institution? What you have here on the screen is a list of all of the types of institutions that are designated by the US government as minority serving institutions. So we have Alaska Native, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, Native Americans serving non-tribal, and the list goes on. And to save time, I'm not going to read them all because I'm going to speak a little bit more in depth about some of them. So as I mentioned, the term MSI, minority serving institutions, refers to institutions that serve these specific populations. As David mentioned earlier, when the US was created, or when settlers came and started creating institutions of higher education in the country, it was in fact based off of European institutions, and it was very, very specifically geared towards white men, white Christian men. And so obviously over the years, the United States, the demographics of this country has shifted significantly. And some institutions were created to serve some of these populations. Some were created by the populations themselves, and others were created by the government designations. So the ones that I'm going to talk about here on this slide, these are the institutions whose designation was determined by the US government. And what you see here is the requirement of the population of students that must be of each of these cultures or ethnicities, because the majority of institutions in the US were created to serve white Christian men. Many of them remain serving a large white population, but because of demographic shifts in the country, we now have these other designations. And for example, Alaska Native serving institutions require that 20% of the student body be of Alaska Native heritage. The Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions must be institutions that serve at least 10%, and so forth and so on. But what that means is it's not always the case, but is a good chance that it's still a predominantly white institution. You can go to the next slide. So this slide gives you a sense of where the Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, and the acronym that is used here is ANAPIs. And again, ANAPIs must enroll at least 10% of Asian American, Pacific Islander students, and they must serve at least 50% of the student population must be eligible to receive financial assistance like the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is it's a grant for low income students. And so not only must the student body be 10% Asian American Pacific Islander, 50% of the student population should also be low income or financially eligible to receive financial assistance like the Pell Grant. And then the schools, in order to be designated an ANAPI, they need to show a plan for how the funding will be used to specifically serve that population, for all of the reasons listed there. And so you can see on this map that most of the blue dots are the institutions and the yellow circles are the communities where there are a large population of Asian American Pacific Islander communities, and the schools have been established more or less in those areas. So that's what this map is showing here. And the other thing that I will note is that for these for most of these institutions, it can if the population of the student, if the student population goes below 10%, then they are no longer designated an ANAPI, or in the case of some of the other ones, some of the other designations. It fluctuates depending on the demographic. If the school applies to be recognized as such, and the reason that schools do this is to be eligible for federal government funding, and the funding is supposed to go to support the students from that particular demographic and population group. Go to the next slide. So there are two institution types that are not negotiable in terms of their designation: tribal colleges and universities and historically Black colleges and universities. This is a map of the United States, and it shows you where the 35 fully accredited tribal colleges and universities that are affiliated with American Indian and Native Alaskan tribes are located. And these two types of institutions, TCUs and HBCUs, are the only two of the group considered minority serving institutions that were created specifically to educate people from those groups. So what that means, what the difference that makes is that these schools, the missions of these schools were created specifically to serve Native Americans, and in the case of HBCUs, people of African descent, which is different from most of the other schools which were created as predominantly white institutions, and thus their mission statements don't necessarily align with what might be a large cultural ethnic group that now attend the university because migration patterns have shifted, and now there happens to be a large population of people from those places in that location attending those universities. Tribal colleges and universities and historically Black colleges and universities were created by Native American, indigenous groups, and people of African descent, well, to serve people of African descent. And that can never change. You can go to the next slide. And then historically Black college or university is a designation that was determined by the Higher Education Act of 1965, and it declares that any institution created before 1964 to serve people of African descent primarily will be designated as a historically Black college and university. Now, I said before that they were created by people of African descent for people of African descent. That's not entirely true. Some of these, like my institution, Howard University, was founded by a white man who was an abolitionist who opposed slavery with the intent to serve the Black population after slavery ended. So there remain 105 historically Black colleges and universities. They are located mostly, as you can see on the map, in the southern part of the United States, where slavery was most prominent. And there used to be a lot more than 105, but for funding reasons and so forth, we now have 105 of them left. They make up 3% of all colleges and universities in the US. However, they educate 10% of all Black students and produce 20% of all Black graduates in the US. But I will also emphasize that they are not only for Black students. The difference between the institutions that were created when settlers came to the US and historically Black colleges and universities is that HBCUs have always been inclusive. Because we were excluded from traditional higher education in this country, we had to create our own. And as such, we have always been inclusive. My university, for example, among the first students were the white female, the daughters of the founders of the institution, along with Black students in the area. And so they learned together, which was unusual. And so we have students from all over the world, from all walks of life, all races, and they are focused on, HBCUs are focused on social justice as a core belief of these institutions. I'll stop there so we have a couple minutes for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tania, for providing us with some more detail and insights into these wonderfully unique and diverse institutions within the United States related to, as you said, the minority serving institutions. And I know one of our comments also mentioned Gallaudet as another institution that could be mentioned. We do have a number of different questions, and we've been encouraging you all to post questions that you have in the Q&A section of this webinar. So let me get to a few of those now. One question is, how do you find out about the quality of higher education institutions, including the role of accreditation agencies? And is there a list or resource that one could look at related to the quality of US institutions? So I'm not quite sure which of you would like to answer that, but we would welcome a response from David. David's going to take it. Yes. Great, David.
I'm happy to try to take a swing at that. So this is one of these controversial kinds of questions or issues. The quality of an institution really depends in many ways on how they educate their students and the kind of research that they do. And that can be very individualistic. Some people can have wonderful experiences at universities that you might never have heard of, and others can have not great experiences at universities that are very well known. There are a whole list of what are called rankings, both within the United States and internationally, and that will give you a general understanding of the quality of the institution. But the caveat is that there are while the rankings will give you a sort of general understanding, they're very controversial in whether they're really good for the individual who goes there. So you can look at places like Times Higher Education is one of the rankings, or QS is one of the rankings. US News and World Report is one of the rankings, and you can go to these and get a sense of the quality. But again, it's quite controversial among a number of people.
Thank you so much for providing a response to that, David. Really appreciate that. Related to that, there was a question about if students at unaccredited institutions have difficulty getting jobs. I don't know if anyone wants to briefly address that. Wing Kai?
Well, really depends on disciplines. I think, as you can see, accreditation is really the process of certifying an institution that is fulfilling its mission of educating their students. So each university in its own region has our own accreditation agencies that really certify that the university can continue to operate every 10 years. So out of the 4,000 institutions, I would say that overwhelmingly, they are all accredited in certain types. And so you just have to really think about the types of programs that you would like to collaborate with and see if you need that type of accreditation. I don't think that that is a determining factor for students to look for jobs. I also see that there's a question about, how to develop partnerships that are not really focusing on the monetary value, because for a lot of countries, it's very expensive to study in the United States and difficult for them to come to for students to come to the United States to study. So long-term mobility of students is just one model of partnerships. There are many different types of partnerships that are less cost, it's more cost effective for institutions. So each institution can look at its own situations and develop their own type of academic collaborations.
Thank you so much. And speaking of partnerships, Tini, I wonder if you could speak briefly to partnerships at minority serving institutions. That's a very broad question, I know. But any particular insights you would like to provide on that?
I think that, well, I can speak mostly for HBCUs. I know that there is certainly an interest in building international partnerships. There's not always the familiarity with contacts or people in different parts of the world. So I know typically HBCUs have tended to focus more on Africa, but I know that there certainly is interest in being much broader in terms of their outreach globally. So I think that this is a good time for exploring partnerships. I think particularly partnerships with HBCUs would be unique. There are all kinds of HBCUs. So my colleagues mentioned all the different public, private, urban, rural, community college, etc. And HBCUs fall within all of those categories. There are public HBCUs, there are private HBCUs, there are urban, rural, there are small, there are very large. And so there are lots of different areas of expertise and strengths that HBCUs focus on, depending on where they are in the US and kind of what are the drivers behind the economies of the particular places that they're in. So I think they will offer great, unique partnerships for many institutions.
Absolutely. And picking up on one of the questions in the Q&A, just to note that, yes, absolutely, these minority serving institutions are for many, many more diverse students than just the targeted populations that Tania had talked about, and can be wonderful institutions in which to partner for so many different reasons that we will explore further at a webinar to follow after the first of the year. So that I know there's several other questions we didn't quite get to answer, but I want to take this opportunity to thank our speakers again today for providing this overview of U.S. higher education. And we will continue this discussion at a webinar focused more on partnerships after the first of the year. There are 2 more webinars to follow, and we'll be happy to send out information to all of you. The first one in January will focus on U.S. institutions partnering with ASEAN institutions and some models for that. And then the second one will look at other models for partnering in general between institutions on both sides of the world. So we look forward to having you join us for those. We look forward to hopefully seeing many of you at the AIA conference in Washington, D.C. And again, a huge thanks to all who made today's webinar possible, including our interpreters, our sign language interpreters, to the State Department, to World Learning, to the AIA team, and especially again to our speakers. Thanks so much to everyone for being part of today's webinar.